It was supposed to be just another flight. 15-year-old Jordan Carter, bright, calm, and carrying the quiet confidence his father had raised him with, took his seat near the window. His dad, Dr. Marcus Carter, a NASA propulsion engineer, was only a few rows away. The hum of boarding chatter filled the cabin. Then, everything changed. A senior flight attendant's eyes lingered on Jordan too long. Questions were asked that no other passenger had to answer. The tone shifted from professional to personal, and within minutes, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom delaying takeoff, singling out a teenage boy who had done nothing wrong. But what they didn't know was that Jordan's father held not just the heart of a protective parent, but the power to ground an entire flight crew and change the rules of the skies forever. What really happened on Flight 482? Why did a calm boy in a window seat become the target of suspicion? And how did a father's quiet resolve turn into a moment that shook an entire industry? Stay with us as we uncover every twist, every confrontation, and every truth they didn't want you to hear. If you believe in justice and dignity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. The concourse at Atlanta International was alive with the kind of rhythm only a summer travel day could produce. Announcements crackled over the PA system, rolling suitcases rattled across the tile, and somewhere in the distance a coffee grinder whined. Jordan Carter adjusted the strap of his backpack and kept his eyes on the gate display. Flight 482 to Los Angeles. On time, boarding in 5 minutes. He was early, as always, at 15. Jordan didn't like to leave things to chance, especially not this trip. The Navy hoodie he wore wasn't just any hoodie. It had the STEM Academy Robotics Club logo stitched over the chest, the one he had spent late nights earning, soldering circuit boards and programming servos with a team of kids just as obsessed with robotics as he was. This trip was more than a getaway. It was the first step toward something bigger, a national robotics competition in LA, a chance to meet people who might one day be colleagues, maybe even friends. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded itinerary, creased from how many times he had checked it. His father's voice echoed in his head from that morning. Be early, be polite, be focused, and if something doesn't feel right, trust yourself. Dr. Marcus Carter wasn't just any dad. He was a lead propulsion systems engineer at NASA, a man whose work could send payloads hurtling toward Mars. This morning, Marcus had hugged him tightly at the curb and said he'd be in the Admirals Club a few gates away. A private meeting was scheduled there, something about the Phoenix Mars propulsion module. It was the kind of meeting Jordan knew better than to ask too many questions about. The boarding area was a collage of travelers, a young mother juggling a toddler and a diaper bag, 2 businessmen discussing quarterly figures, a group of college students laughing loudly over iced coffees. Jordan kept to himself, scrolling through an article about last year's robotics champions. When boarding began, it was mechanical in its rhythm. The gate agent smiled perfunctorily as she scanned his boarding pass. Group 3, Seat 14B. He stepped onto the jet bridge, the air turning cooler as he neared the aircraft door. The cabin smell hit him first, that mix of stale air, coffee, and the faint tang of disinfectant. He nodded politely to the older woman at the door, wearing a navy blazer and silver wings. Her name tag read Claudia West. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Jordan found his seat on the aisle, midway down. He slid his backpack under the seat ahead of him, careful not to bend the folder containing his acceptance packet for the competition. Across the aisle, a businessman in a charcoal suit was already typing furiously on a laptop. Behind him, a couple was bickering softly about carry-on space. The intercom popped with a burst of static, followed by a deep, confident voice. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your captain, Dale Harmon. We're looking at a smooth ride to Los Angeles today. Final paperwork's being wrapped up, so we should be pushing back in about 5 minutes. Sit back, relax, and we'll have you on your way shortly." Jordan smiled faintly, tapping his phone screen to put it in airplane mode. 5 minutes to pushback. He pictured his dad in the lounge, sipping black coffee while running numbers in his head, the same way he did before every major project review. Jordan felt a flicker of pride. As the last few passengers found their seats, Jordan glanced toward the front. Claudia West was standing in the galley, speaking quietly with another crew member, her eyes scanning the cabin. It wasn't unusual for a flight attendant to check seat rows, but her gaze paused when it reached his, just for a second longer than it had on anyone else. He looked away, telling himself it was nothing. The metallic thunk of the cabin door closing echoed down the aisle, sealing them into the narrow, pressurized world of the plane. The engines hummed at idle, and Jordan leaned back, letting the rhythm of boarding fade. He didn't notice Claudia glance his way again before disappearing into the galley. Outside the window, the jet bridge was being pulled back. Any minute now, he thought. But instead of the whir of the engines spooling up, there was stillness. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Jordan looked up at the seatbelt sign. Still lit, of course. No announcements. The businessman in front of him glanced at his watch and sighed. The couple behind him had stopped their bickering, now united in annoyance. At 15 minutes, the intercom clicked again. Captain Harmon's voice was still calm, but the edge was gone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a minor security issue that requires additional verification. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. Cabin crew, stand by for further instructions." Jordan's brow furrowed. Minor security issue. He tried to imagine what that could mean: misplaced luggage, a paperwork error, maybe a passenger with the wrong boarding pass. Still, something in the captain's tone made his stomach tighten. Around him, the cabin shifted. Passengers whispered, their eyes darting, scanning for signs of trouble. Jordan kept his gaze fixed on the seat back in front of him, wishing the flight would just take off. The sound of footsteps approached from the front. Claudia West emerged from the galley, her posture precise, her navy jacket pressed to perfection, silver wings gleaming under the cabin lights. She walked slowly down the aisle, eyes sweeping each row in turn. When she reached row 14, she stopped. Her shadow fell across his knees. Her voice was polite, even, but carried an undercurrent that made the hairs on his neck rise. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass and identification? Please." Jordan blinked. "Sure." He reached into his wallet, pulling out his student ID from STEM Academy and the boarding pass the gate agent had scanned not 20 minutes ago. Claudia examined them for longer than seemed necessary. Her eyes flicked from the ID to his face, then back again, as though she were searching for a flaw in the paper or in him. Finally, she handed them back, her lips pressed into a neutral line. "Thank you. Please remain in your seat for now." She didn't move away immediately. Instead, she lingered for a second, eyes steady on him, before stepping aside and continuing down the aisle. Jordan's fingers tightened around the armrests. He told himself it was just a random check, but the knot in his stomach told him otherwise. The engines still weren't roaring. The plane sat at the gate like a caged bird that had decided it didn't want to fly. The hum of the auxiliary power unit was the only reminder they were supposed to be going somewhere. Jordan shifted in his seat, the cool vinyl creaking under him. The air in the cabin felt heavier now, stale and unmoving. Minutes crawled by. 5 became 10. 10 became 15. The businessman in 13A muttered under his breath and tapped furiously at his phone. The couple in 15C and 15D had gone quiet, their crossed arms and stiff postures a silent protest against the delay. Somewhere in row 12, a baby fussed, the mother rocking gently in an attempt to keep the peace. Jordan glanced at the watch on his wrist. The competition in Los Angeles was still hours away, but he felt a pressure building in his chest. He had planned every step of this trip so carefully. Delays meant uncertainty. Uncertainty made his stomach twist. The intercom clicked. Captain Harmon's voice came through, missing the easy warmth from his earlier greeting. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a minor security issue that requires additional verification. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Cabin crew, prepare for further instructions." The words landed in Jordan's mind like a riddle with no answer. A minor security issue. It could have meant anything. A bag in the wrong compartment. A passenger whose boarding pass didn't scan properly. Yet something about the captain's clipped delivery made it feel heavier than that. His gut told him it wasn't about luggage or paperwork. Around him, the atmosphere shifted. People began looking at one another, searching for a clue in a stranger's face. Eyes flicked toward the overhead bins, toward the galley, toward the cockpit door. Jordan could feel those same glances brushing past him, lingering for a beat longer than they should. Footsteps echoed from the front of the plane. Claudia West emerged from the galley again, her posture sharp, her navy uniform immaculate. This time her eyes were scanning the rows with a precision that made Jordan's skin prickle. She moved steadily, her gaze sweeping over travelers with polite detachment until it landed on him. She stopped at row 14. "Sir," she said, her tone neutral but firm, "I'll need to verify some information with you. Could you confirm your destination today?" Jordan blinked. "Los Angeles," he replied, keeping his voice even. "And the purpose of your travel, I'm competing in a national robotics competition, the STEM Academy event." He gestured slightly toward the logo on his hoodie. Claudia's expression didn't change. "I see. And you are traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am. My dad is here at the airport. He's in the Admirals Club for a meeting." Her eyes narrowed a fraction. "Would you mind stepping into the galley with me for a quick clarification?" Jordan felt the air between them thicken. "I have my ticket. My seat is right here. Is there a problem?" The words came out calm, but his hands tightened slightly on the armrests. "Sir, the captain requires a security confirmation. Refusing to comply could be considered non-cooperative behavior." That phrase hit him hard. Non-cooperative. It sounded official, dangerous even, like something that could follow him beyond this flight. He felt his pulse in his throat. This was not how today was supposed to go. "I'd like to know what this is about before I leave my seat," he said quietly. Claudia's gaze sharpened. She straightened, lips pressed together. The businessman in 13A shifted in his seat, pretending not to eavesdrop, but clearly listening. Somewhere behind them, a passenger muttered, the words lost in the low hum of the cabin. From the rear, another voice broke the tension. "Claudia, wait." A younger flight attendant stepped forward from the back galley. Emily Rhodes. Her uniform was the same as Claudia's, but her demeanor was different, softer. Her eyes moved between Jordan and Claudia, concern flickering in them. "What's going on here?" Emily asked, her voice careful. "Security verification," Claudia answered briskly, without looking at her. Emily glanced at Jordan, then at the boarding pass now tucked into the seat pocket in front of him. "I walked by twice during boarding. He's been in his seat the entire time. There's nothing unusual here. Jordan felt a flicker of relief. Someone had noticed. Someone believed him. This is coming directly from the captain, Claudia said. Her tone clipped. He wants this passenger escorted off until further notice. For what reason? Emily's voice held an edge now. If we're delaying departure for a security check, we owe an explanation. At least to him. The businessman in 13A muttered loud enough for nearby rows to hear. She's right. Claudia's eyes flicked toward the cockpit, her jaw tight. The captain doesn't need to justify security calls to passengers or crew. The intercom crackled again. Captain Harmon's voice filled the cabin, now stripped of its earlier calm. Lead flight attendant, please comply with the directive. Remove the passenger in 14B immediately. We will not delay this aircraft for non-compliance. A chill ran through the rows. Jordan could feel the shift. Sympathy from some passengers gave way to impatience from others. To them, he was no longer just a kid going to a competition. He was the reason they weren't in the air yet. Emily's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move away. She crouched slightly so she could speak to him directly. You're not in trouble, she said softly. Don't let them make you think you are. Her words were almost lost beneath the hum of the engines, but Jordan heard them. He held on to them like a rope in the dark. Claudia stepped closer. Mr. Carter, you've heard the captain. Please gather your belongings. Emily hovered near, her presence a quiet act of defiance. Her eyes met Jordan's for a brief second, and in them he saw something that steadied him, an unspoken promise that this wasn't over. The captain's voice returned, sharper than before. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a delay due to a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions. Cabin crew, proceed according to protocol. Jordan's stomach sank. The words painted him as a problem, dangerous enough to halt a flight. Around him, irritation simmered. The businessman in 13A snapped his laptop shut. The woman across the aisle muttered about people not following rules. Heat rose to his cheeks. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to shout that he had done nothing wrong. Claudia's voice was low and cold. You see what's happening now? You're holding everyone up. This could be easier if you just come quietly. Emily's voice was a whisper now. He hasn't done anything. The man in row 12 twisted around. Can we just get this over with? Some of us have connections. Jordan gripped the armrest harder. The weight of all those eyes pressed down on him. Every second of silence felt like another step towards something he didn't want to imagine. The air in the cabin had changed. It was no longer just stale. It felt charged, like the moment before a summer storm when the sky waits to break. Jordan could feel the tension in the way people shifted in their seats, the way they avoided looking at him for too long, but still stole glances when they thought he wouldn't notice. Claudia West remained standing in the aisle, her posture straight and unyielding. Mr. Carter, she said, I will ask you one more time to come with me. Jordan's chest tightened. He glanced down at his hands resting on the armrest. Fingers curled inward. Inside, his thoughts collided. If I stand up, it will look like they were right. If I stay here, they'll make it worse. He had flown before. He knew the rules, the unspoken hierarchy of air travel. The crew's word is law. His father had taught him that, but his father had also told him something else. Respect works both ways. If someone treats you as if you have no right to be where you are, you don't have to make it easy for them to keep thinking that. Claudia waited, lips pressed into a thin line. Emily Rhodes lingered nearby, her body angled slightly toward Jordan as if she could shield him from what was coming. "Ma'am," Jordan said quietly, "I've been in my seat since I boarded. I have my ID. I have my ticket. I haven't done anything wrong." Claudia's gaze didn't waver. This is not up for discussion. The businessman in 13A exhaled sharply, leaning back in his seat as if to signal to everyone around him that his patience had run out. A woman in row 11 muttered something about making a scene. Jordan could feel the judgment rolling over him, heavy and suffocating. He knew that most of them didn't know the full story. They just wanted to leave. But their impatience was turning into something more, something pointed. Captain Harmon's voice cut through the tension. "Lead flight attendant, if the passenger does not comply in the next 60 seconds, we will request airport security to escort him from the aircraft." The words echoed in Jordan's head. "Airport security!" Images flashed through his mind, officers walking down the aisle, their presence filling the narrow space, taking him by the arm, leading him past every watching eye, his name in some report, maybe even the news. His stomach knotted. Emily took a small step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Jordan, listen to me. You have done nothing wrong, but they're going to make it look like you have." Her words hit something deep inside him. He had seen this play out before, not on a plane, but in other spaces. A teacher's suspicion about a calculator that was his. A store clerk's watchful eyes following him down an aisle. The slow erosion of innocence when people assume you don't belong. The cabin was silent except for the low hiss of the vents. Jordan could almost hear the seconds ticking away. He kept his gaze forward, breathing slow, trying to anchor himself. He thought of his dad, sitting just a few gates away. Marcus Carter wouldn't raise his voice or cause a scene, but when something wasn't right, he didn't look away. He acted. Jordan slipped his hand into the pocket of his hoodie and felt the cool surface of his phone. He unlocked it with his thumb, the faint vibration masked by the hum of the engines. His fingers typed quickly, the message forming in short, clipped lines. "Dad, still on the plane. They say security issue. They're trying to remove me. Please help." He hit send. The word delivered appeared beneath the message, but not read. He tucked the phone back into his pocket, forcing himself to sit still, to keep breathing. Claudia glanced at him again, impatience creeping into her expression. "Mr. Carter, your refusal to comply is holding this flight. I strongly suggest you make the right decision." Her tone was cool, but carried an edge that made it clear she believed she was in control. Jordan met her gaze for a brief moment, not with defiance, but with a steadiness he didn't know he had until now. Emily's eyes flickered toward the cockpit, then back to Jordan. She adjusted the strap on her service apron, a small motion, but one that seemed to signal she was still standing with him. Around them, passengers shifted, some leaning into the aisle to watch. A man in row 9 whispered something to his seatmate, his eyes never leaving Jordan. The couple in row 15 exchanged a look, their earlier argument now forgotten in the presence of a new drama. The captain's voice returned. "Colder this time. Cabin crew, proceed according to protocol." Jordan braced himself, every muscle tense. He wasn't going to get up just because someone wanted him to vanish quietly. He hadn't done anything to deserve this. But the weight of the cabin's collective frustration pressed down on him, testing his resolve. He thought of his robotics team, the hours spent building and programming, the pride when they had qualified for the Nationals. He thought of the STEM Academy logo on his hoodie and what it stood for, and he thought of the lesson his father had repeated so many times. Sometimes standing still is the only way to move forward. The moment stretched, taut and unyielding. Then, from the front of the plane, a metallic click sounded, the kind that meant the main cabin door was opening again. Heads turned. Passengers murmured in low, curious voices. "That's not supposed to happen," someone whispered. "Once the door's closed, it stays closed unless there's a serious issue." Jordan's heart thudded in his chest. The jet bridge came into view through the open doorway, bathed in the bright, sterile light of the terminal. A figure stepped into the frame, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket with a patch on the chest that caught the light. For a split second, Jordan thought it was his dad. But as the man stepped forward, the patch revealed itself, not NASA, but a corporate airline logo. His presence alone drew attention. He spoke briefly to the gate agent and then to Claudia, his voice too low for Jordan to hear. Claudia's expression shifted, slightly surprise, then calculation, but whatever was said ended quickly. The man nodded once, stepped back onto the jet bridge, and disappeared. The door closed again with a final metallic thud. Confusion rippled through the cabin. A woman in row 8 whispered, "What was that about?" A man in 13A shook his head, baffled. Jordan's pulse slowed, the hope that had flared up sinking again. Whoever that was, they weren't here for him. Claudia returned to his row, her professional mask back in place. "Mr. Carter," she said. Tone clipped. "Please prepare to disembark." Emily's brow furrowed. She glanced toward the cockpit, then at Jordan, as if trying to work out a plan in the span of a heartbeat. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. Whatever was happening here was not about a random security check. Jordan sat still, the fabric of the seat pressing into his back. If his father saw the message, there was still a chance this could turn around. But for now, he was alone in this cabin, and every pair of eyes seemed to be waiting for him to stand up and walk away. The captain's voice came again, sharper than before, carrying a weight that seemed to press into every corner of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a delay due to a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions. Cabin crew, proceed according to protocol." The words hit Jordan like a physical blow, refusing to comply. He had done nothing but sit quietly in his seat, but now the entire plane had been told he was the reason they weren't moving. It was more than just an accusation. It was a verdict without trial. Around him, the shift was immediate. Sympathy drained from some faces, replaced with irritation, impatience, even suspicion. The businessman in 13A snapped his laptop shut with a loud click, the sound like a punctuation mark to his frustration. Across the aisle, a woman leaned toward her seatmate and whispered, shaking her head. A man 2 rows back let out a long, audible sigh. Jordan kept his eyes on the seat back in front of him, but he could feel the heat rising in his face. The weight of all those stares pressed down like invisible hands. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to shout that he had done nothing wrong. He wanted someone, anyone, to believe him without question. Claudia West stood just a step away, her voice low but firm, the kind of tone people used when they wanted to leave no room for argument. "You see what's happening now? Mr. Carter, you're holding everyone up. You could make this easier on yourself and on everyone else here if you just come quietly." Jordan's fingers dug into the armrests. His mind raced. If he moved, he would be giving in to something that felt deeply wrong. If he stayed, he risked things spiraling beyond his control. His father's voice played in his head, "Be calm, but do not surrender your dignity." Emily Rhodes was still nearby, her body angled in subtle defiance of Claudia's stance. She shook her head slightly. "He hasn't done anything," she said under her breath. Her words were nearly drowned out by a voice from farther forward in the cabin. "Can we just get this over with? Some of us have connections to make." The tone was sharp, impatient, not directed at Claudia, not at the captain, at Jordan. It stung more than he expected. He was being cast as the obstacle, the one holding everyone hostage in this sealed metal tube. The murmurs swelled, a quiet tide of restlessness. A woman across the aisle crossed her arms, lips pressed thin. The couple in row 15 leaned toward each other, speaking in low voices, their glances darting toward him between sentences. The captain's voice returned. "Lead flight attendant. You have 60 seconds before I call airport security." Jordan's pulse thudded in his ears. He could picture it uniformed officers boarding, their steps heavy in the narrow aisle, hands at the ready. The thought made his chest tighten. He imagined his name being entered into some report, his face captured on a passenger's phone, the clip spreading online without context. Emily crouched beside him again, her voice urgent but steady. "Jordan, this is intimidation. They're making it sound like you've done something dangerous, but you haven't. You need to know that." He nodded faintly, not trusting himself to speak. His throat felt tight, his mouth dry. He thought about his father again. Marcus Carter had faced pressure like this in his own career. High-stakes moments in meetings where billions were on the line. Times when politics threatened to outweigh reason. His father never raised his voice in those moments. He just brought the truth into the light and let it do the work. Jordan's hands trembled slightly in his lap. He wanted to channel that same control, to be still when everything around him was moving toward chaos. Claudia's gaze flicked toward the cockpit. 30 seconds, she said, almost to herself, before returning her attention to him. Passengers shifted again. The businessman in 13A leaned into the aisle, staring at Jordan as if the sheer force of his glare might compel him to move. A teenage boy across the row lifted his phone, pretending to check messages but angling the camera toward him. Jordan swallowed hard. The edges of his vision seemed to narrow. The air felt thick, harder to pull into his lungs. He could feel the cabin's collective impatience closing in. And then, a sound. A sharp metallic click from the front. Not the intercom. The door. The main cabin door was opening again. Heads turned, the rustle of clothing and the squeak of seat cushions filling the air as passengers craned for a view. Whispers rippled from row to row. "That's not supposed to happen," someone muttered. Bright light from the jet bridge spilled into the doorway. A figure stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark blue jacket with the NASA insignia over the chest. Jordan's heart jumped. It was his father, Dr. Marcus Carter's expression was calm, but there was a weight behind his eyes that made the air feel charged in a new way. His presence seemed to straighten the spines of those around him. He didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, it carried through the cabin. "Jordan." Relief surged through Jordan's chest, but it was tempered by the shock on Claudia's face. She recovered quickly, stepping toward Marcus. "Sir, this is a secure area." Marcus didn't look at her. His gaze slid past, landing on the closed cockpit door, where his captain Harmon Emily stepped back slightly, sensing the shift. Passengers leaned closer, drawn in by the quiet authority in Marcus's voice. Behind him, a gate agent appeared carrying a black folder marked with a bright orange tab. She looked flustered, speaking quickly. "Dr. Carter, I just received a message from NASA operations. It's about the Phoenix Mars propulsion project." Several passengers glanced at each other at the mention of NASA. The businessman in 13A froze mid-breath, recognition dawning on his face. Marcus took the folder, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the top page for only a second before he looked up. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer on steel. Captain Harmon signed off on a delay request that will directly impact the shipment schedule for NASA's propulsion modules. That's a contract worth several $billion to this airline. Can you explain why my son is at the center of a delay that conveniently aligns with that authorization? Gasps broke the silence. Passengers exchanged looks, the dynamic shifting again, curiosity overtaking impatience. Claudia's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted toward the cockpit, then back to Marcus. Jordan sat still, his mind trying to catch up. Whatever this was, it had just grown far beyond him. Marcus stepped fully into the aisle now, standing solid, his voice even. "I want the captain out here. Now!" The cockpit door remained shut. No response. Marcus pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, scrolling with precision until he pressed a name. The cabin went still, everyone straining to hear. "Elaine, it's Marcus Carter. I'm on Flight 482, still at the gate. Your captain has delayed this flight under false pretenses, targeted a passenger, my son, and signed off on a hold that jeopardizes the Phoenix Mars contract. You need to be on this aircraft immediately." He ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket as though nothing more needed to be said. Jordan exhaled slowly. The cabin felt different now. No one was leaning away from him anymore. All eyes were on the man in the NASA jacket standing tall in the aisle, and the sealed cockpit door that suddenly seemed much less secure. For a moment, the cabin was suspended in a kind of stunned silence. The image of Dr. Marcus Carter standing in the aisle in his NASA jacket seemed to hold everyone in place. Even Claudia West, who had been the embodiment of authority minutes earlier, kept her hands folded in front of her and her eyes fixed on the cockpit. The sound of the engines at idle filled the space between breaths. Jordan stayed still in his seat, trying to take in what had just happened. His father had walked in without raising his voice, without a single wasted movement, and somehow shifted the entire tone of the flight. The cabin door opened again. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Every head turned. But it wasn't the captain. A man in a dark suit stepped aboard. He was older, his hair silver at the temples, his polished shoes clicking on the threshold. No NASA emblem, no air of family connection. His eyes scanned the cabin before he stepped toward Marcus and Claudia. There was a brief, low conversation, the words too quiet to carry beyond the first few rows. Claudia's expression softened a fraction, then hardened again. The suited man nodded, glancing once at Jordan with a look that was neither hostile nor warm, just assessing. He turned without another word and stepped back onto the jet bridge. The door shut behind him. Jordan felt the hope that had flared with his father's arrival flicker unsteadily. He didn't know who the man was or what had just been decided in those hushed tones. Around him, passengers exchanged questioning looks. A few leaned into the aisle as if they could see through the sealed door to the jet bridge beyond. Marcus didn't move from where he stood. His face gave nothing away. Jordan caught his father's eye. "Is it handled?" he wanted to ask without words. But Marcus's small shake of the head told him everything he needed to know. Claudia stepped forward. Her voice clipped. "Mr. Carter, please prepare to disembark." The words landed like cold water. Jordan could hear the rustle of passengers shifting, the small thuds of feet repositioning in the row behind him. The businessman in 13A leaned back with a look of grim satisfaction, as though the outcome was already written. Emily Rhodes stepped closer before Jordan could move. "Ma'am, with respect, We still haven't heard a valid reason for removing him. I've been in the aisle since boarding and have seen no suspicious behavior." Claudia's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is not up for debate." Jordan's throat tightened. He knew the balance could tip at any moment. Security could walk in and everything would be decided without his say. The intercom clicked on again. Captain Harmon's voice came through, steady but edged with authority. "Cabin crew, remove the passenger from 14B immediately. If there is any further delay, I will be contacting airport police to assist." Gas and murmurs moved like a current through the cabin. Jordan's fingers gripped the armrest so hard his knuckles whitened. His father's presence had slowed the tide, but the captain's voice had sent it surging again. Marcus spoke without raising his tone. "I asked for the captain to come out. I will ask again." The cockpit door stayed closed. Jordan's chest rose and fell with deliberate slowness. He felt the weight of eyes again, but this time there was a mixed curiosity, uncertainty, even sympathy in a few glances. Still, the impatience of others pressed like a shadow over the moment. From somewhere in the rear, a passenger's voice broke the stillness. "Why don't they just tell us what's going on?" Emily's gaze flicked to Marcus. She was breathing more quickly now, as if she was bracing herself for whatever came next. The cabin door opened once more. This time, the shift was immediate. Conversations died instantly, and the hum of the idle engine seemed louder than before. A woman stepped inside. Her dark suit was sharply cut, her heels silent on the carpeted aisle. A badge on her lapel bore the airline's logo in polished silver. Her presence was calm but unyielding, the kind of authority that didn't need to shout. She walked straight toward Marcus, offering a quick nod. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice professional, but carrying an undertone of urgency. "I'm Elaine Porter, Vice President of Flight Operations. I came as soon as I got your call." Passengers stirred at the name. Even those who didn't know who she was seemed to sense the weight it carried. "Good," Marcus replied evenly. "Then you know why I'm here." Elaine's jaw tightened. She turned toward the cockpit, her voice crisp. "Captain Harmon, open this door immediately." There was a pause, then the metallic click of the lock. The door swung open to reveal Captain Dale Harmon. His face was pale, a bead of sweat at his temple. He opened his mouth, but Elaine held up a hand. "Not a word." "Captain, you are relieved of command. Effective immediately. Gather your personal items and deplane. You will report to corporate security at once and await further instructions." Gasps and murmurs erupted through the rows. Harmon's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He disappeared into the cockpit briefly, then reemerged with a small black flight bag. He walked down the aisle without meeting a single pair of eyes, disappearing through the cabin door. The air seemed to shift as the door closed behind him. Attention broke, though not completely. Elaine turned to Marcus. "I'll be speaking with you further once we're in the air." Marcus gave a single nod. Jordan felt the pressure in his chest ease, but only slightly. The situation was far from over, and he could sense it. Elaine faced the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We will depart shortly under new command. What you've witnessed here today is unacceptable, and it will be addressed." Her words carried weight. People leaned forward instinctively, sensing there was more. In a few minutes, the engines would spool up again. The flight would leave the gate. But Jordan knew the story of what had just happened would not end with takeoff. It had just begun. Elaine Porter remained standing at the front of the cabin, her presence holding the space the way a captain's voice once had. The difference was that she didn't need the intercom to command attention. Her eyes scanned the rows, taking in each passenger as though silently inviting them to witness what would come next. The door to the cockpit remained open for the moment. A younger first officer, his face tight with concentration, stepped into view. "You have command now, Ms." Porter told him. "Prepare for departure as soon as possible." He nodded quickly and ducked back inside, the door closing softly behind him. The hum of the auxiliary power seemed louder now, filling the quiet that settled after her words. Claudia West stood frozen near the galley, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. Elaine's gaze found her. "Ms. West, remain where you are. We will address your role in this once we're airborne." Jordan felt every muscle in his body unclench just slightly. It was the first time since boarding that the weight on his chest lifted, but only enough to let him take a full breath. He kept his eyes forward, not wanting to appear smug or victorious. His father had taught him that moments like this were never about proving someone wrong. They were about ensuring the truth came to light. Marcus Carter stayed in the aisle for a beat longer, his hand resting on the back of Jordan's seat. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Jordan nodded, though the knot in his stomach hadn't gone away. "I'm okay," he said, but his voice was low. Passengers were still murmuring, some leaning into the aisle to catch a better view. The businessman in 13A, who had been openly impatient earlier, now kept his eyes down on his folded hands. A woman across from him gave Jordan a faint nod. Her expression softened. Elaine turned back to Marcus. "Dr. Carter, I need to understand what led to this before we push back." Marcus spoke clearly, his voice carrying to the nearest rows. "I received a text from my son. He told me he was being targeted for removal without explanation. I came here to see for myself. In the process, I learned that this delay, labeled as a security issue, coincided exactly with a hold order Captain Harmon signed earlier today. That hold would have interfered with NASA's propulsion module shipment for the Phoenix Mars project, a shipment this airline is contractually bound to support. A ripple moved through the cabin. Someone in row 10 whispered, "This is way bigger than I thought." Elaine's expression didn't change, but her posture straightened. "And you believe the two are connected?" "I don't believe it," Marcus said. "I know it." Claudia shifted slightly, as though she wanted to say something, but Elaine's glance silenced her. "We'll get to that, Ms. West." Emily Rhodes was still standing near Jordan's row. She looked between Marcus and Elaine, then spoke in a voice that carried without being loud. "I can confirm that Mr. Carter was seated since boarding. I walked the aisle twice before takeoff procedures, and there was nothing unusual in his behavior." Elaine nodded once. "Thank you, Ms. Rhodes. Your statement will be noted." Jordan sat very still, aware that this wasn't just about him anymore. The air in the cabin felt electric, like everyone was waiting for something definitive to happen. Elaine glanced toward the door, where the gate agent was still standing uncertainly on the jet bridge. "Close the door," she instructed. "We've spent enough time on the ground." The agent nodded and disappeared. A moment later, the heavy metallic thunk of the cabin door sealing shut echoed through the fuselage. Elaine turned back to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be departing momentarily. Once we're airborne, I will make a statement regarding what you've seen here today. This airline will not ignore incidents like this." Jordan could feel the subtle shift again. Where there had been hostility toward him minutes earlier, now there was curiosity, even a kind of cautious support. The tension wasn't gone, but it had changed shape. Marcus leaned closer to him. "You handled yourself well," he said softly. Jordan wasn't sure he agreed. He felt like his voice had been trapped in his throat most of the time, that he'd been surviving the moment more than managing it. But the way his father said it made him believe it might be true. The engines began to spool up, a deep vibration running through the floor. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking seat belts and overhead bins. Emily's eyes met Jordan's as she passed, and she gave the smallest nod. When the plane finally pushed back from the gate, there was a collective exhale from the passengers. Conversations began to bubble up again, though many still cast glances toward the front, as if they didn't want to miss what would happen next. As the nose of the aircraft turned toward the runway, Elaine moved quietly to the jump seat near the galley. She spoke briefly to Marcus, her tone low and deliberate. "We have procedures for investigating crew conduct," she said, "but those procedures fail if leadership doesn't enforce them." Marcus's voice matched her calm. "Then it's time to change the leadership that allows it." Jordan looked out the window as the runway came into view. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, and the city skyline in the distance shimmered in the heat. He tried to focus on the fact that he was still going to Los Angeles, still going to compete, but he couldn't ignore the heaviness in his chest, the knowledge that this flight had become more than just a trip. The engines roared as the plane began its takeoff roll. Jordan's head pressed back against the seat. The familiar push of acceleration, a strange comfort after so much stillness. As they lifted off, the city fell away beneath them. The clouds rose to meet them, sunlight flooding through the windows. Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the vibration of the climb wash through him. Somewhere below, the events of the last hour were already setting other things in motion. He didn't know exactly what his father and Elaine would do next, but he had a feeling the ripple wouldn't stop when they landed. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, Elaine unbuckled and stood. She picked up the intercom handset, her eyes scanning the rows. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "you deserve to know exactly what happened before we departed. The captain of this flight initiated a delay under the guise of a security issue, targeting a passenger without cause. This was not only an abuse of authority, but an action that coincided with an operational delay threatening a major contractual obligation of this airline." The murmurs that followed were low, but intense. Elaine continued, "Effective immediately. Captain Harmon has been removed from duty pending investigation. Additional reviews will be conducted regarding crew conduct and management oversight. We will not tolerate discrimination or misuse of authority at any level." Jordan glanced around. Many passengers were leaning forward, listening intently. Some nodded, others simply sat in stillness, absorbing the words. Elaine set the handset back in its cradle. "This is not the end of this matter," she added. Jordan met his father's eyes. Marcus gave a single nod. The corners of his mouth set in a line that meant he was already thinking several steps ahead. The flight continued on, but for Jordan, the countdown had begun, the one that would decide what this moment would mean once they touched down in Los Angeles. Cruising altitude came with its usual shift in the cabin's mood. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and a few passengers got up to stretch or head to the lavatory. But the buzz of conversation wasn't about travel plans or vacation destinations. It was about what had just happened in the last hour. Jordan could feel it in the way heads tilted toward one another, in the low voices that paused whenever someone from the crew walked by. Elaine Porter stayed in the jump seat until the flight leveled off, then rose with a measured calm. She moved down the aisle, stopping by row 14. Her eyes softened when they met Jordan's, but her tone was business. "I'd like to speak with both of you in the forward galley for a moment." Jordan exchanged a quick glance with his father before unbuckling. Marcus gave him a reassuring nod and stood. The forward galley was small. The hum of the avionics behind the closed cockpit door a constant reminder of where they were. Elaine closed the curtain to block the view from the cabin. "I want you to know," she began, looking at Jordan first, "that I reviewed the initial incident report Harmon filed before departure. It says you refused to follow a crew member's instructions and were uncooperative during a security verification." Jordan felt a hot flash of disbelief. "That's not true. I never refused to give my ID or boarding pass. I just asked why I was being told to leave my seat." Marcus's hand rested lightly on his son's shoulder. "Elaine, I have no doubt my son's account is accurate. And if you cross-check the timing of that report with the operational hold Harmon signed this morning, you'll see the overlap." Elaine's brow furrowed. "We've already begun pulling timestamps from the dispatch logs. But I suspect you know something more." Marcus leaned slightly closer, his voice low. "I do. The Phoenix Mars propulsion module was scheduled to be loaded onto a chartered cargo flight out of Los Angeles tomorrow morning. The hold Harmon signed off on would have delayed this aircraft's arrival just long enough to miss the window for transferring those components. Missing that window would have set the project back weeks, and it would have given a competing contractor the opening to push their own bid." Elaine's eyes narrowed, the weight of the information settling in. "And you think Harmon was acting on someone else's orders?" "I know he was," Marcus replied. "The question is whether this airline's leadership is willing to find out who gave them." The hum of the engines filled the pause that followed. Elaine's gaze shifted between father and son. Then she gave a short nod. "I'll get the investigation started before we land." Jordan shifted slightly, the narrow galley walls closing in around him. "I just don't understand why they came after me to make it happen." Marcus's voice was quiet, but certain. "Because you were an easy distraction. A young black passenger traveling alone. They knew it would be simple to frame you as a security concern without much pushback from the cabin." Jordan's chest tightened. The truth of it hurt more than the accusation itself. It wasn't just about him, it was about every time someone like him had been made into a problem without cause. Elaine straightened. "I'll be making another announcement before landing. In the meantime, stay in your seat and keep your head high. You've done nothing wrong, and the passengers should see that." Back in row 14, Jordan sank into the seat, feeling the curious eyes of a few passengers as he returned. Emily Rhodes passed by with the beverage cart, her expression softening when she saw him. "Coffee for you, sir," she asked Marcus, "and water for you." Jordan accepted with a faint smile. "Thank you." For the next hour, the flight settled into a strange quiet. The conversations that had filled the air earlier were subdued now, replaced by occasional glances toward the front, where Elaine and Marcus spoke in low tones. Jordan looked out the window, the vast expanse of clouds below them like a shifting white ocean. He tried to focus on the reason he was going to Los Angeles, the competition, the friends he hoped to make, the chance to build something amazing. But the memory of Claudia standing over him, the captain's voice branding him as non-compliant, kept intruding. He wondered what his robotics teammates would say if they knew. Would they understand the way a moment like that changes how you see everything? The chime for the seatbelt sign sounded as they began their descent. The cabin tilted gently, the engines softening. Elaine stepped into the aisle, her voice steady over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we land, I want to address the events you witnessed earlier." The murmurs died down, heads turned. The captain of this flight initiated a delay under a false security pretext. She said, "This action targeted a passenger without cause, and coincided with an operational hold that could have impacted a critical NASA contract. That is unacceptable, and it will not be tolerated. A ripple moved through the cabin. Jordan felt a warmth in his chest at the shift in tone. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about the truth. Effective immediately. Captain Harmon has been removed from duty pending investigation, Elaine continued. Senior Flight Attendant Claudia West is also being placed on suspension until further review of her conduct during this flight. Gasps and whispers filled the rows. Claudia kept her face turned toward the galley, her hands still folded tightly in front of her. Elaine's voice softened, but carried even more weight. I also want to recognize the professionalism of Junior Flight Attendant Emily Rhodes, whose actions today reflected the highest standards of integrity under pressure. She will be appointed as acting lead for the remainder of this flight. Emily's cheeks flushed, but she nodded once in acknowledgement. As for Mr. Jordan Carter, Elaine said, her eyes scanning the rows until they found him. He has conducted himself with remarkable composure in the face of unjust treatment. In recognition of that, this airline will be establishing the Jordan Carter STEM Leadership Scholarship, supporting underrepresented students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The applause began hesitantly, then grew, filling the narrow cabin. Jordan sat still, unsure what to do with the sudden attention. He glanced at his father, who gave a quiet nod. Elaine finished. This incident will be fully investigated, and the results will be made public. We owe you transparency, and we will deliver it. When she returned to the front, the applause faded into a quiet murmur. Jordan felt lighter, though he knew the real work was still ahead. This wasn't just about one flight. It was about making sure the next person in his seat wouldn't have to go through the same thing. The wheels touched down in Los Angeles with a soft jolt. As the plane taxied to the gate, Jordan watched the city lights flicker in the distance, a reminder that life was still waiting beyond this metal tube. But so was the story, and it wasn't finished yet. The terminal lights glowed through the cabin windows as the aircraft rolled to a stop at the gate. Seatbelts clicked open, and the usual scramble began, people standing too soon, overhead bins opening, bags shifting. But this time, the shuffle had an undercurrent. No one forgot what had happened in the air. Eyes still darted toward the front where Elaine Porter stood, her posture unshaken. Elaine lifted a hand to signal the passengers to remain seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay where you are for a moment. There are matters that require resolution before we deplane. The announcement stilled the motion in the aisles. People sank back into their seats, curious and restless. The engines were spooling down, but the tension was not. Marcus leaned slightly toward Jordan. Stay here. Son! Jordan nodded, though his pulse quickened. He knew that look on his father's face, focused, deliberate, like he was about to dismantle something piece by piece until the truth stood bare. Elaine stepped aside, giving Marcus room at the front of the cabin. Her voice lowered, so only he could hear. You wanted the captain earlier. Now you'll get the person above him. The jet bridge door opened, and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped aboard. He carried himself with a confidence that bordered on entitlement. His ID badge swung from his breast pocket, Regional Director of Flight Operations. His nameplate read, Victor Harlan. Marcus didn't wait for pleasantries. Mr. Harlan, he began. You'll want to sit for this, but we don't have time. Harlan's brow furrowed, his tone curt. Dr. Carter, I understand there was a misunderstanding during boarding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Marcus interrupted, his voice low but cutting. Your captain targeted my son to create a delay. That delay lined up exactly with a hold order that would have jeopardized a NASA propulsion module transfer worth billions to your airline. That's not coincidence. A ripple went through the nearest rows. Harlan glanced around, clearly aware of the audience. Dr. Carter, if you have a concern, the appropriate venue is not the aisle of a passenger cabin. And yet here we are, Marcus replied. The venue wasn't my choice. The circumstances were. Elaine folded her arms, her eyes fixed on Harlan. We've already removed Harmon from duty. The operational hold is under review. I'm sure the board will be interested to know how deep the chain of approval runs. Harlan's jaw tightened. That's an internal matter. Marcus stepped forward just enough to close the space between them. It stopped being internal when you allowed a black teenager to be treated like a criminal to cover a delay you couldn't justify on paper. Gas stirred among the passengers again. Jordan felt the back of his neck grow warm under the collective focus. This was no longer a quiet corporate conversation. It was a public reckoning. Harlan's voice dropped into something colder. Dr. Carter, if you think accusing me, I'm not accusing you, Marcus cut in. I'm stating what I will take to the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and the press if I don't see immediate action. The silence that followed was thick. Harlan glanced at Elaine, perhaps hoping for support, but her expression was resolute. Elaine spoke. Mr. Harlan, you've been in this business long enough to know what this looks like. We have witness accounts, a timeline, and the victim's statement. Trying to minimize it now will only make the fallout worse. Harlan's shoulders stiffened. What are you proposing? First, Marcus said, you issue a written acknowledgement of misconduct by the crew and any management personnel involved. Second, you commit to reviewing every discretionary removal in the last 5 years. Third, you make structural changes to ensure this doesn't happen again, including giving Vice President Porter direct oversight on crew authority training. Harlan's lips pressed into a line. And if I refuse, then the Mars propulsion module won't be your only lost contract, Marcus said evenly. I have colleagues in aerospace and government procurement who would be very interested in hearing how your airline treats its passengers, particularly when it serves your operational delays. Jordan watched as the man's confidence faltered for the first time. Harlan's eyes flicked to Elaine, then to the curtain shielding the galley. He gave a short nod. I'll draft the statement tonight. Elaine's voice was sharp. Not tonight. Now. Our corporate counsel can finalize it before we even finish disembarking. The tension in Harlan's shoulders didn't ease, but he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. Fine. But this stays between us. No, Marcus said. It stays on the record. The air in the cabin seemed to shift again. Jordan could almost feel the mood of the passengers turning less restless now, more invested in the outcome. It wasn't every day that they saw someone stand up to the very people who ran the airline. Harlan's stylus moved across the tablet, his handwriting quick and clipped. When he finished, he handed it to Elaine, who read it carefully before passing it to Marcus. Marcus scanned the page, then nodded once. This will do for now, but I'll expect the public release within 48 hours. Elaine addressed Harlan again. I'll hold you to this, and I'll be watching the follow-through. Harlan's gaze flicked to Jordan briefly. Without meeting his eyes for long, he murmured, My apologies, Mr. Carter. Jordan didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to. The apology was hollow, but the acknowledgement in front of witnesses was something. Elaine turned back to the passengers. Thank you for your patience. We'll begin deplaning in just a few minutes. Please remember that what happened here is the start of an investigation. not the end. As the passengers began to gather their belongings, Jordan stayed seated, letting the rows ahead clear. His father remained beside him, silent for the moment. The hum of conversation filled the air, tinged with the knowledge that they had just witnessed more than a travel delay they had seen a system confronted. When they finally stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool, conditioned air of the terminal wrapped around them. Jordan looked back at the aircraft, the door now closing behind the last passenger. "You didn't let go," Marcus said quietly. "That's what matters." Jordan managed a small smile. "It didn't feel like much in the moment. It never does," his father replied. "But the ripples have already started." The next morning in Los Angeles, the sun poured across the city in a pale gold light that seemed almost at odds with the heaviness of the previous day. Jordan sat at the small table in their hotel suite, a plate of untouched eggs cooling in front of him. His mind kept replaying the scene from the cabin, the locked cockpit door, his father's voice like steel, the tension in the faces of the passengers. Marcus emerged from the adjoining room in a crisp shirt, his NASA badge clipped to his belt. His phone was in his hand, a steady stream of messages and emails lighting up the screen. He set it down on the table and poured himself a cup of coffee. "You didn't sleep much," Jordan said quietly. "Neither did you," Marcus replied. Then he leaned back in his chair. "But this isn't over. Elaine called me this morning. She's already started the internal review." Jordan lifted his eyes, and Marcus took a sip before answering. "She confirmed what we suspected. Harmon's hold order came from higher up, someone in operations planning who had been pressured by a contracting competitor." Jordan frowned. "So this was all about that Mars module?" "Partly." Marcus's voice was steady. "But it was also about how easy it was for them to use you as a cover. That's the part I'm not letting go." The knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus opened it to find Elaine Porter standing there in a tailored blazer, her eyes alert despite the early hour. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "We've got a problem," she said, without preamble. "The statement Harlan drafted last night is being buried. Legal is claiming it needs further review, which is code for never seeing daylight." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's not going to happen." Elaine's expression was grim. "I've been in this industry for 20 years. I know when leadership is circling the wagons. If they stall, this all fades and Harmon walks with a retirement package." "Not if we make it public," Marcus said. Jordan sat straighter. Public Marcus glanced at him. "Sometimes the only way to reverse authority is to take the truth outside the walls it's hiding behind." Elaine nodded. "I've already spoken to 2 board members who are on our side. They're willing to back a release if we can tie it to a broader issue. Patterns of abuse of authority, disproportionate targeting of certain passengers." Jordan's chest tightened. "That's a lot bigger than me." "It is," Marcus said. "And that's why it matters." Elaine took a seat across from him. "Jordan, yesterday you stood your ground under pressure most adults would crack under. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't lash out. And you didn't let them paint you as the problem. That's not just resilience. That's the center of the story we need to tell." Jordan looked down at his hands, unsure how to respond. He thought about the eyes of the passengers, the man in 13A who had looked at him like he was nothing but an inconvenience, and the woman across the aisle who had softened after hearing Elaine's words. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally. "Your account," Marcus answered, "in your own words. Not as a press statement, but as a first-hand narrative. Elaine's team will corroborate it with passenger testimonies and flight records," Elaine added, "and we'll include the scholarship announcement. It shows that this isn't just about holding people accountable. It's about building something better. Marcus checked his watch. I have to be at the Aerospace Summit in 2 hours. But before I go, Elaine and I are meeting with a journalist who's been covering discrimination in commercial aviation. She's credible, thorough, and not afraid to push. Jordan felt a mix of nerves and something else, a flicker of purpose. Elaine stood. I'll have a car pick you up after lunch. We'll bring you to the interview location. It's not about making you a symbol if you don't want to be. It's about telling the truth. So this can't happen to someone else without consequences. When she left, the suite felt quieter, but the air between father and son carried a current. Marcus refilled his coffee and looked at Jordan. Authority only works when it's trusted. Yesterday, you saw what happens when that trust is broken. Today, we start making sure they can't break it the same way again. By late afternoon, the small conference room in a downtown office building was set with 3 chairs, a recorder, and a single camera. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Naomi Glenn, greeted them with a firm handshake. I appreciate you both being here, she said. I've read the preliminary reports, but I want to hear it directly from you. Jordan spoke slowly at first, describing boarding, the delay, Claudia's inspection of his ID, the pressure to leave his seat, the captain's announcement branding him as non-compliant. As he spoke, the words came more easily. He could see Naomi's pen moving quickly across her notepad. Marcus filled in the operational details, the timeline of the hold order, the connection to the propulsion module shipment, the pressure from competitors. Elaine, who had joined them, provided the internal context, Harmon's history of discretionary removals, and the reluctance of leadership to act. Naomi looked up. This is bigger than one captain. This is a systemic problem. Exactly, Elaine said. And if we don't shine a light on it now, it'll keep happening in ways that are harder to trace. When the interview ended, Naomi promised to verify every detail before going to print, but her tone carried conviction. This is going to get attention. Outside the building, the late-day traffic hummed like a constant undercurrent. Marcus placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. Whatever happens next, you've already done the hardest part. Jordan tilted his head. Staying in my seat. No, Marcus said. Staying yourself. That night, as the city lights stretched out beneath their hotel window, Jordan realized something. Authority could be reversed, but only if someone was willing to face it head-on. And yesterday, with his father at his side, he had done exactly that. By the next morning, the headline was everywhere. NASA engineer's son. Targeted on Flight 482. Airline accused of cover-up. It sat at the top of the national news feed, framed by a photo of Jordan stepping off the plane with his father. His expression caught between exhaustion and quiet resolve. The article was long, detailed, and left little room for corporate spin. Naomi Glenn had kept her promise. Every timeline, every quote, every policy reference was backed by verifiable records. In the Carter Hotel suite, the television played a steady loop of the coverage. Passengers from Flight 482 were being interviewed, their faces blurred, their voices altered. I saw the whole thing, a woman's voice said. That boy didn't do anything wrong. They just kept pushing him until it looked like he was resisting. It was wrong. A man followed, his tone tight. I travel for business all the time. I've seen crew members bend the rules for certain passengers, but I've never seen them bend them to remove someone without cause. It made me sick. Jordan sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He wasn't sure if it felt good or strange to hear strangers defending him. Marcus paced slowly, phone in hand, speaking in short bursts to contacts in Washington. Yes, it's public now. No, we're not letting it fade. Yes, Naomi's piece is airtight. Elaine Porter arrived just after noon, her blazer replaced by a simple sweater, but her eyes were sharper than ever. She dropped a folder on the coffee table. The board met this morning. They're demanding a full inquiry. Jordan straightened. And they've suspended Victor Harlan pending review. Elaine said, they're also opening an audit on all discretionary removals for the past 5 years. Marcus gave a short nod. That's a start. Elaine looked directly at Jordan. They want you to speak at the shareholder meeting next week. Jordan blinked. Me. Elaine nodded once. Your voice is the reason this has traction. They need to hear from the person this happened to. Not just from executives. Not just from me. From you. Jordan's stomach tightened. Public speaking wasn't exactly his comfort zone, but he could feel the weight of what she was asking. Marcus crossed the room and sat beside him. You don't have to say yes, but if I do, it might make them take it seriously. Jordan finished. It will, Marcus said. The decision hung between them for a moment before Jordan nodded. I'll do it. By the end of the day, the story had moved beyond aviation circles. Civil rights groups were issuing statements. Former airline employees were sharing anonymous accounts online of similar removals targeting young black and brown passengers. Hashtags began trending. Seat with dignity and not your scapegoat. That evening, Jordan and Marcus appeared on a live interview from the hotel. The anchor, a poised woman with a calm but firm tone, asked Jordan directly, when you were told to leave your seat, what went through your mind? Jordan hesitated, then answered, at first, I thought it was a mistake, that if I just explained, it would be fine. But then I realized they weren't listening to me. They weren't interested in what I said. They'd already decided who I was and what I'd done. The anchor turned to Marcus, and as a parent, Marcus's gaze was steady. As a parent, it's terrifying. Not because I thought my son would lash out or make it worse, but because I knew that no matter how calm he stayed, they could still twist the story. And they almost did until the truth came out. The segment ended with a clip of Elaine Porter outside the airline's headquarters, addressing reporters. We are changing the way authority is exercised in our cabins. This is not optional. This is overdue. The next morning, Marcus received a message from a senior FAA official. We're watching closely, and we're prepared to intervene if the reforms aren't real. It wasn't just the airline now. It was the federal level. The shareholder meeting arrived a week later, in a glass-walled conference hall buzzing with media and guarded by private security. Marcus and Jordan walked in together, the hum of conversation dimming as heads turned. Elaine met them at the door, handing Jordan a printed copy of his remarks. You can stick to this, she said quietly, or speak from the heart. Jordan looked down at the page, then back up at her. I'll speak from the heart. When his name was called, he walked to the podium, the weight of the room pressing in. The lights were hot, the microphone sensitive enough to pick up his breath. He began simply, My name is Jordan Carter. I was the passenger in seat 14A on Flight 482. He told the story without embellishment, without raising his voice. He described the moment Claudia demanded his ID. The way Harmon's voice over the intercom made him feel smaller than the seat he was sitting in. The disbelief when the captain accused him of non-compliance. He talked about the scholarship Elaine announced mid-flight, and what it meant to have someone in authority stand up instead of stand by. And then he paused, letting the silence settle. I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm here because the next person this happens to might not have a parent in the front row or a vice president in the galley. They might be alone. And if your policies don't change, you'll be the reason they think they don't belong in that seat. When he stepped back from the podium, the room was quiet for a moment, then filled with applause. Some of it was polite, but some was real. Marcus knew the difference. Afterward, a board member approached Marcus privately. "We're implementing new guidelines, mandatory documentation for every discretionary removal, an independent review panel, and authority limits for captains in non-emergency situations." It was more than Marcus had expected this early. The real test would be in the follow-through. But for now, it was movement. That night, as Jordan sat on the hotel balcony overlooking the city, he felt the strangeness of knowing his words had shifted something much larger than himself. Marcus joined him, leaning on the railing. "You reversed their authority, son. Not just in that cabin, but in their whole system." Jordan gave a small smile. "Feels like we're just getting started." The week after the shareholder meeting, the story refused to fade. Instead, it grew legs and started running into corners Marcus had only half expected. It was no longer confined to the airline's reputation. It had begun to pull at the wider fabric of the aviation industry. Jordan sat at the kitchen counter in their home back in Houston, scrolling through news feeds while his father rinsed out the coffee pot. Articles popped up from cities they'd never been to. Teen passenger's story. Forces airlines to review cabin authority policies. Another headline, civil rights groups demand federal oversight. After Flight 482 incident. One video clip caught Jordan's attention. It was a panel discussion on a morning show. A retired pilot, silver-haired and polished, was saying, "Authority in the air is absolute for safety reasons, but absolute authority with no accountability invites abuse. The Carter case is an example of why limits must exist." Jordan replayed the clip twice, not because he liked hearing his name, but because he knew pilots rarely admitted this in public. Marcus came over, mug in hand. "Hearing it from them is different, isn't it?" "Yeah," Jordan said. "It's like they're finally saying it out loud." Later that day, Elaine called. Her voice carried the faint echo of an airport terminal. "You've started a chain reaction," she said. "Two other airlines are preemptively updating their authority protocols to avoid getting caught in the same storm. One is even adding independent passenger advocates on high-traffic flights." Jordan leaned against the wall, phone to his ear. "Is that normal? No more," Elaine replied. "It's unprecedented." The following Monday, Marcus and Jordan were invited to a closed-door session with the FAA's Aviation Consumer Protection Division. The meeting room was spare. All steel chairs and a long table. A senior official named Robert Lanham opened with a firm handshake. "We've reviewed the documentation. What happened on Flight 482 highlights gaps in the federal guidelines. We're drafting amendments, but we'd like your input before we finalize." Jordan glanced at his father, unsure if he was really supposed to be in the room for this, but Lanham gestured for him to stay. "You were the passenger. That perspective matters." They spent the next 2 hours going over potential reforms, clear documentation requirements, limits on captains' discretionary authority when safety isn't directly at risk, and new reporting channels for passengers to challenge decisions without delaying the flight. "At one point," Jordan said quietly, "if you make a rule, it should be something a passenger can point to in the moment, not just something they read about later." Lanham smiled faintly. "That's exactly the kind of insight we don't get from the policy side." By the time they left, Marcus knew this had moved far beyond a single airline's embarrassment. This was about rewriting parts of an industry playbook that had stood unchanged for decades. Back in Houston, Jordan tried to return to normal life. School, homework, basketball practice. But there were moments walking down the hallway and hearing his name in a whispered conversation, getting tagged in social media posts from people he didn't know that reminded him how public his life had become. One afternoon, as he sat in his room working on a physics assignment, Marcus knocked on the door. "You've got mail," he said, holding a thick envelope. No return address. Jordan opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter from a passenger on Flight 482. The writing was neat, deliberate. "I didn't say anything that day. It began, and I regret it. I saw the way they treated you. I saw you stay calm when I might not have. You've made me realize that silence in the face of unfairness is its own kind of harm. Thank you for not letting this be forgotten." Jordan read it twice, then tucked it into his desk drawer. The next call came from Naomi Glenn. Her follow-up piece was in the works, focusing on the industry-wide changes. "I've been talking to union reps," she said. "There's resistance from some, but more agreement than you'd think. This could be the start of something big." And then, the most unexpected twist. Marcus received a request from the International Aviation Summit, an annual gathering of airline executives, regulators, and industry leaders from around the world. They wanted both him and Jordan to speak on the closing day. "It's a chance to put this on a global stage," Marcus told him over dinner. "But it's also going to be the toughest room you've ever stood in." Jordan hesitated. "What if they don't care? Then at least they'll have heard it from someone who lived it," Marcus said. The summit was held in a towering hotel in Geneva, its glass facade reflecting the pale winter sky. The conference hall was vast, the audience filled with people in suits who'd spent their lives making decisions about flights without ever sitting in the middle seat of a packed plane. Marcus spoke first, laying out the operational facts, the chain of decisions that had led to the misuse of authority on Flight 482 and the reforms already in motion. Then he stepped aside for Jordan. The podium felt higher than he expected, the microphone cool under his hand. He could see faces from a dozen countries looking up at him. "I'm not here to tell you how to fly a plane," he began. "I'm here to tell you what it feels like when someone uses that plane to make you small." He told the story again, not for the first time, but with the same calm detail that had made it impossible to dismiss before. He spoke about dignity, about how rules without fairness are just tools for the powerful, and about what it meant to have someone in authority stand up for you. When he finished, the applause was not loud, but it was sustained. People stood, not everyone, but enough. Later, a delegate from a European airline approached him. "Your story is going to be part of our training program next year. Our crews need to hear it." That night, in their hotel room overlooking the lake, Marcus sat by the window while Jordan stretched out on the bed. "You've done something most people never get to do," Marcus said quietly. "You've changed the conversation." Jordan thought about the letter in his desk drawer back home. "Maybe," he said, "but I think the conversation is just getting started." Spring came slowly to Houston that year, the air still holding the cool edge of winter mornings. Jordan's life began to settle into something that almost resembled normal again, though normal felt different now. He still had homework, basketball practice, and late-night study sessions before exams. But there were new elements woven into his week's calls from journalists, invitations to speak at events, emails from strangers who had read his story. One Saturday morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, scanning through a document from the FAA. Across the top, in bold type, was the title Passenger Authority Reform Proposal, Final Draft. He had been part of the advisory group shaping the new guidelines, but seeing them in this polished form made the months of work feel real. Jordan poured himself cereal and sat down. Is that it? Marcus turned the screen so his son could see. This is it. Mandatory documentation for any removal. Independent passenger review boards in every major hub. Clear limits on captain's discretionary authority in non-emergencies. It's all here. Jordan read a few lines, nodding slowly. So it's official. Once the administrator signs it next week, Marcus said. Jordan leaned back in his chair, feeling a small rush of relief. It wasn't that the reforms would erase what happened on Flight 482, they wouldn't. But it meant fewer people would have to fight the same fight. That afternoon, a package arrived addressed to Jordan. Inside was a framed photo of the International Aviation Summit stage, with him and Marcus standing at the podium. A note was tucked behind the frame. Your voice made a difference. Keep using it. Elaine. That evening, they called Elaine to thank her. Her voice was warm, lighter than Jordan had ever heard it. You two didn't just change a policy, you shifted the culture. That's harder to measure, but I can feel it happening. The weeks that followed brought more signs of that shift. Naomi Glenn's follow-up article ran on the front page of a major national paper, highlighting not just the Carter case, but a dozen other instances where passengers had been unjustly removed. Several airlines announced new training programs for crew members, using Jordan's story as part of their curriculum. One day at school, a younger student stopped Jordan in the hallway. Hey, you're that kid from the plane, right? My mom showed me the article. She said you made it safer for me to fly alone. Jordan didn't know what to say except, thanks. In April, Marcus took him to the dedication ceremony for the new Seat with Dignity scholarship, the one Elaine had announced mid-flight. The first group of recipients stood on stage, their faces a mix of excitement and disbelief. One girl, barely older than Jordan, hugged him afterward. I'm going to be the first in my family to go to college because of this, she said. That night, Jordan sat on the back porch, the air humming with the quiet sounds of their neighborhood. Marcus joined him, handing him a mug of hot chocolate. You ever think about that day on the plane? Marcus asked. Sometimes, Jordan admitted. It's weird, it feels like it happened yesterday and years ago at the same time. Marcus nodded. That's what happens when something changes you. Jordan looked down into his mug. I guess I keep wondering if it would have gone the same way if Elaine hadn't been there. Probably not, Marcus said, but you were still the one who stayed calm. You were still the one who told the truth when it mattered. Elaine's courage amplified yours. It didn't replace it. A few weeks later, Jordan received another letter. This one was from Claudia West. It was short, handwritten on plain stationery. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. I let my position blind me to my responsibility as a human being. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I know an apology can't undo it, but I hope you'll accept it. Jordan read it twice, unsure how he felt. Forgiveness wasn't simple, but the fact that she had written it at all said something. The summer before his junior year, Jordan was invited to tour the NASA Johnson Space Center as part of a youth STEM initiative. Marcus walked with him through the massive training hangars, pointing out equipment and sharing stories from his own work. At one point, they stopped in front of a full-scale model of a Mars lander. See that Marcus said, "That's the module they tried to use you as cover for." Jordan stared at it, the sleek lines and metallic panels gleaming under the lights. And now, Marcus said, it's on schedule for launch in 5 years. The realization hit Jordan in a strange way. All that drama, all those lies, had been about protecting or sabotaging something that would outlast every person involved. In September, exactly 1 year after Flight 482, Jordan and Marcus flew together again, this time on a different airline, heading to Washington for the official signing of the Passenger Authority Reform Act. The flight was uneventful, the crew polite but unremarkable. It was, in its own way, perfect. At the signing ceremony, the FAA administrator spoke briefly before handing the pen to Marcus. "I think it's fitting," she said, "that the first signature on this document belongs to the person who sparked it all." Marcus signed, then passed the pen to his son. Jordan's name looked small on the thick paper, but it was there, part of something bigger. That night, back at their hotel, Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. "You know," he said, "you could have let that day make you bitter." Jordan smiled faintly. "Guess I chose something else." Marcus turned. "What's that?" "To make it better," Jordan said. The next morning, before their flight home, Jordan checked his email. Among the usual school announcements and news alerts was a message from Naomi Glenn. "There's another story I think you should hear. Different airline, similar problem. I thought you might want to talk to them." Jordan closed his laptop slowly. The work wasn't done. Maybe it never would be. But he knew one thing: he was ready to keep going. And somewhere in the skies over America, a young passenger was settling into a seat, unaware that the rules protecting them had been shaped, in part, by a teenager who refused to give up his own. What happened to Jordan Carter wasn't just about one flight. It was about a system that too often forgets the human being in seat 14A. It was about the way a young black teenager could be treated as a threat before he was even offered a drink. It was about a father who refused to raise his voice, but instead raised a standard the entire industry could no longer ignore. Through calm resilience and unshakable truth, Jordan and Marcus forced change, new rules, new accountability, and a reminder that authority without fairness is just another form of injustice. Their story is a call to every passenger, every crew member, every bystander. Silence protects the wrong side. We are left with a choice: condemn the prejudice we see, or let it take another seat on the next flight. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, or if it reminded you of the dignity every person deserves, then let's keep the conversation alive. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and demand change. Because the skies belong to all of us, and no one should be told they don't belong there.